My name is Natalie Foster. I'm 27 years old, and until 6 weeks ago, I was just an ordinary kindergarten teacher trying to stretch each paycheck far enough to make rent and still afford art supplies for my class. My life was simple, unremarkable even, but it was mine, quiet, structured, and safe. I woke up at 6 every morning, made a single cup of coffee, and walked 2 blocks to the little school where 30 tiny humans believed I could fix the world with a Band-Aid and a smile. My parents had different ideas of success. My father, Richard Foster, was an executive who measured worth in square footage and bank balances. My mother, Cynthia, lived in a permanent state of comparison, the kind of woman who judged affection by how expensive the flowers were. They weren't bad people, not really. Just people who mistook busyness for love. And in their busyness, they forgot to notice me growing up. The only real warmth in my life from my grandparents, Elizabeth and Harold Alexander. Their home was the kind of place that smelled like cinnamon and sunlight. My grandmother made quilts for the local shelter and believed that kindness was a form of inheritance. My grandfather, a quiet man with a sharp mind, used to say, "Family shows. It's true face when there's something to lose." I never understood what he meant back then. I do now. 6 weeks ago, my world changed. The call came just after dinner. I was sitting at my kitchen table, half watching a documentary, when an unfamiliar number flashed across my phone. The voice on the other end was calm but careful, the kind of voice that prepares you for bad news. My grandparents had been in a car accident. They didn't make it. For a long moment, the world fell silent. Grief doesn't always arrive as tears. Sometimes it's just emptiness. I sat there listening to the hum of my refrigerator, waiting to feel something. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, condolences, and casseroles I didn't eat. My parents took control. Of course, arranging the funeral, making statements, ensuring the flowers matched the family name. I stood beside them like an extra in a film I didn't audition for. At the funeral, I watched strangers cry harder than my parents did. My mother dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. My father checked his watch twice during the eulogy, but I felt everything. Every memory, every Sunday dinner, every story my grandfather told about working, his way up from nothing, and it all pressed against my chest until I could hardly breathe. When the final prayer ended, I thought that was the end of the story. But grief, I would learn, isn't the final chapter. Sometimes it's just the prologue. Because 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from my grandparents' lawyer, and with it, the truth that would set everything on fire. The envelope was thick, the paper cream-colored and heavy, the kind that made you instinctively sit down before opening it. The name printed across the top, Langley, Brown and Associates, meant nothing to me, but the words inside did. It was short, polite, and clinical. Dear Ms. Foster, please be advised that your presence is requested at the reading of the last will and testament of Mr. and Mrs. Harold and Elizabeth Alexander. The proceeding will take place this Friday at 10 o'clock in the morning at our downtown office. Kindly confirm your attendance. For 3 days, that letter sat unopened on my coffee table after the first read, its folded edge taunting me. My parents, of course, had already called me, more than once. My mother's voice had that brittle tone she used when she was pretending not to care but desperately did. Darling, your grandparents were generous people. They always wanted fairness. I imagine they've left something small for you too. Something small. The way she said it, soft, dismissive, stung more than it should have. Friday came with gray skies and cold wind. The lawyer's office was an old building downtown, the kind where everything smelled faintly of varnish and memory. My parents arrived first, immaculate, composed, as if they were attending a board meeting rather than the closing. Chapter of 2 lives. I walked in quietly, clutching the strap of my worn purse, feeling out of place among their expensive grief. The lawyer, a tall man named Philip Langley, greeted us with the kind of measured sympathy people in his profession must perfect over time. After a brief introduction, he reached into his folder and pressed play on a small recording device. The room filled with the warm, steady voice of my grandfather. If you're hearing this, it means your grandmother and I have left this world hand in hand, just as we always hoped to. We've lived long enough to see what our family has become. Success has its place, but it can also make hearts cold. We want our legacy to go where it will be nurtured, not spent. He paused. You could almost hear the faint tremor of emotion to our daughter, Cynthia, and son-in-law Richard. We leave a sum of $50,000, enough to remember us kindly. The remainder of our estate, including our properties, accounts and holdings, will go to our granddaughter, Natalie Foster." The silence that followed could have cracked glass. My mother blinked as if she'd misheard. My father leaned forward. "I'm sorry," he said to the lawyer. Voice flat, controlled. "Could you repeat that?" Philip cleared his throat. "The estate, all assets totaling $26.4 million, are to be transferred in full to Ms. Natalie Foster." My mother's hand went to her chest. My father's jaw tightened. And me, I just sat there, staring at the floor. The words $26 million echoing in my head like a foreign language. I wasn't sure whether to laugh, cry, or run, because in that single moment, my life and my family stopped being the same. "I'm done keeping the peace," I said, and closed the door. Through the peephole, I watched her linger for a few seconds, her expression hardening before she walked away. That night, I found an envelope slid under my door. Inside was a single line, typed, unsigned. "You don't deserve what's not yours." No signature, no address, just a warning. And as I stared at it under the dim kitchen light, one thought settled cold in my chest. This wasn't about family anymore. It was war. The morning after the note arrived, I didn't go to work. My hands shook too much to hold a pen, and my mind kept replaying the same questions. Who left it? How far were they willing to go? And what would my grandparents think if they saw what their death had turned into? I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by unopened mail, stale coffee, and the thick envelope Matthew had given me at the will reading. Until now, I hadn't had the courage to look through it. But fear has a strange way of turning into resolve when there's no one left to hide behind. Inside were legal documents, financial statements, and letters, all neatly labeled in my grandmother's handwriting. The top envelope was marked for Natalie, only when we're gone. My breath caught as I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, dated almost a year earlier. "My dearest Natalie, if you're reading this, then we are no longer there to remind you how proud we are of you. We know this inheritance will come with pressure, envy, and attempts to sway you. People may call you selfish for not sharing, but remember, this is not about division. It's about trust. You are the only one who ever saw beyond what money could buy. You saw people, you saw us, and that's why everything we've built belongs in your hands. Protect it, grow it, use it to do good, but never let guilt dictate how. Love always. Grandma and Grandpa." By the time I finished reading, my eyes blurred with tears. Their faith in me was both comforting and crushing. They'd given me not just wealth, but a responsibility, one I couldn't run from. I spent the next few days in quiet reflection. I visited their house for the first time since the funeral. The key clicked softly in the door, and the familiar scent of lemon polish and old books wrapped around me like an embrace. Everything was exactly as they'd left it. Her teacups arranged by color, his chessboard mid-game. I walked through the halls, touching memories like fragile glass. This wasn't just a house. It was their story, the proof of a lifetime of choices rooted in humility. Work and love. That's when I made a decision. If my family wanted a war, I would give them one, but not their kind. No shouting, no lawsuits, no begging for understanding. I'd fight the way my grandparents had lived, with strategy, patience, and quiet strength. I would learn everything about what they built, every investment, every property, every share in Alexander Logistics. I sat frozen. My father, the man who preached discipline, who judged everyone for being irresponsible, had stolen from his own parents. And they'd protected him, even as it broke their trust. But that wasn't all. I clicked through more files. One showed emails between my aunt, Pam, and a construction firm, deals made using company, connections she wasn't entitled to. Another file revealed that my mother had accessed my grandparents' accounts 2 years ago, attempting to transfer funds on behalf of family needs. The bank had flagged it. They'd all been feeding from the same trough for years. Quietly, secretly, and without remorse. My grandparents hadn't left me their fortune because I was special. They'd left it because I was the only one they could trust, not to sell it off piece by piece. I leaned back in the chair, the glow from the monitor flickering across the dark room. This was the truth they'd warned me about. The truth meant to protect me, or destroy them. I copied everything onto my laptop, encrypted it, and backed it up to cloud storage. Then I sat there for a long time, listening to the rain tapping against the window. They thought I was just a naive teacher with no power, no leverage, no plan. They were wrong. I finally understood what my grandparents had meant. Money wasn't the inheritance. Truth was. And now I had both. 3 days passed before I saw any of them again. Long enough for my father to sense something had changed. Long enough for the lawyers to begin whispering that the will's transfer, documents had gone through. The storm, inevitable as it was, had begun to build. Sunday morning, the family gathered at my parents' estate, a sprawling house my father loved to call the center of operations. It was a place of manicured perfection. Glass staircases, spotless floors, imported furniture. Everything looked immaculate, but nothing ever felt like home. When I arrived, Jason was already waiting by the door, expression taut. "Dad's furious," he said quietly. "He says you've hijacked everything." I smiled faintly. "Then let's go give him a reason." The dining room felt like a courtroom. My father sat at the head of the table, my mother beside him, hands folded neatly as if she were his silent accomplice. Pam and her husband lingered across from them, whispering like jurors before a verdict. "Natalie," my father began, his voice sharp and cold, "you've made quite a scene. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Yes," I said evenly. "I honored their wishes, something you couldn't manage while they were alive." His face darkened. "Don't lecture me. I built this family's reputation. I kept things running while your grandparents wasted time on charities and sentimental nonsense." "Reputation?" I leaned forward. "You mean the one you bought with their money? Or the one you nearly destroyed when you stole $600,000 from the company?" I paused. "Like what?" Jason hesitated, then whispered. "He's meeting with someone tomorrow, an old associate from the logistics days. The same guy who used to handle, let's just say, off-the-books problems." That sank in like ice water. My father wasn't just scared of losing money. He was scared of losing control. And control was the only thing he ever worshipped. After Jason left, I sat by the window, staring at the city lights below. My grandfather's note echoed in my head. "If they turn on you, let the truth speak for itself." Maybe it was time to do exactly that. The next morning, I sent a secure email to a financial journalist I trusted from college, someone who had once written about corporate ethics. I didn't give her the whole archive, just a small fraction, proof of the embezzlement, the falsified contracts, and a memo signed by my father himself. Enough to start the fire, not enough to burn the whole house down. By noon, my father's name was trending. The company's stock plunged. News anchors dissected every rumor, every scandal. The mighty Alexander family, once the symbol of quiet success, had become a public spectacle. My mother called that evening, her voice shaking. "You've destroyed us, Natalie." "No, Mom," I said softly. "You destroyed yourselves. I just stopped pretending." For a long time, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "You think the truth will set you free? It never does. It just leaves ashes." When the call ended, I sat in the dark, heart pounding, a strange mix of guilt and relief flooding through me. Maybe she was right. Maybe truth didn't set you free. But sometimes it was the only thing left. The morning air felt electric, charged with a tension I couldn't shake. My inbox overflowed with messages from journalists, investors, even former colleagues, who suddenly wanted exclusive insights. Story had gone global. News anchors speculated about systemic fraud. Analysts questioned leadership ethics, and photos of my father leaving his office, surrounded by cameras and flashing lights, filled every feed. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, but I knew better. My father wasn't beaten. He was cornered, and that made him dangerous. I locked my apartment door, checked the windows twice, and tried to breathe. For the first time, fear crept in. What if Jason had been right? What if my father really had people who could make problems disappear? That night, as I left the office, I noticed a black sedan idling near the curb. It didn't move when I walked by. It was still there when I turned the corner. My stomach tightened. I crossed the street and ducked into a crowded cafe, pretending to browse my phone. 10 minutes later, the car drove off. Coincidence? Maybe. But something inside me said otherwise. At home, I went through the files again. There was still more I hadn't revealed, darker things that would not only destroy my father's reputation but could implicate half his business partners. Documents hinting at bribes, concealed environmental violations, falsified safety reports, It was an empire built not just on greed but rot. I could release it all, but I hesitated. If I crossed that line, there would be no going back. No reconciliation, no quiet life afterward. Just fallout. The next day, Jason called. His voice was hoarse, frightened. "Dad's gone off the rails. He's convinced you're trying to ruin him completely. He fired half the staff, threatened the board, and now he's saying he'll take back what's his." "What does that mean?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. "But I think you should leave town for a while." I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. "Leave? This is my home, Jason. I'm not running from him." Jason was silent for a moment. "Then at least don't be alone tonight." That evening, I found my front door slightly ajar. My heart froze. I hadn't left it that way. Inside, nothing looked stolen, but everything had been moved. A drawer half open, a picture frame tilted. The USB drive was gone. Someone had been here. I called Jason immediately. "They have it. The drive." His breathing quickened on the other end. "Then it's starting. He's making his move." My pulse pounded. "He won't stop, will he?" "No," Jason whispered. "He's lost too much. He'll try to erase the problem. And Nat," he paused, "you're the problem." The line went dead. I stood in the dark apartment, my reflection faint in the window, city lights flickering behind me like distant fire. The storm I had unleashed was no longer in the news. It was here. It was personal, and it was coming straight for me. I left my apartment before sunrise. A single backpack, a burner phone, a few changes of clothes, nothing traceable. The city was still half asleep, its streets washed in pale orange light, and I felt like a ghost moving through it. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even Jason. The fewer who knew, the safer he'd be. I took the train north, sitting by the window and watching the skyline dissolve into fog. Every sound, a door sliding open, a man clearing his throat, made me flinch. Somewhere out there, someone had the USB drive, and whoever had it wasn't working alone. By noon, I was in a town I barely remembered visiting as a child. A quiet place of boarded-up shops and cheap motels. I paid cash for a room, under a fake name, and spent the afternoon scrubbing every trace of myself from my online accounts. No social media, no bank cards, no digital trail. I was a woman who didn't officially exist. But hiding didn't stop the world from spinning. The news kept coming. My father had resigned temporarily from the board, citing stress. The company's shares had plummeted. Commentators debated whether criminal charges were inevitable. Some praised the unnamed whistleblower. Others called it a calculated family betrayal. That night, a message arrived on my burner phone. No caller ID, just 4 words. "You can't hide forever." I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then another text followed. "Meet me where it began." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. My father always believed in symbolism. Where it began could only mean one place. The old Alexander warehouse on the outskirts of the city, the same one from the footage on the USB drive. Every instinct told me not to go. Yet a different voice whispered that maybe this was the endgame my grandparents had foreseen. The truth wasn't only meant to protect me, it was meant to finish what they'd started. I spent the next day preparing. I printed copies of the most damning files. I'd backed up and sealed them in an envelope addressed to a national journalist. If anything happened to me, I'd instructed an automated email to send her the access key. Insurance. As dusk settled, I took a borrowed car and drove toward the city. The roads were slick from an earlier rain, the sky bruised with thunderclouds. My headlights cut through the gloom as the warehouse came into view, its windows dark, its walls streaked with rust like dried blood. I parked a block away and stepped into the night, heart hammering. The air smelled of oil and wet concrete. A single light glowed inside the building. I reached for my phone to record, but before I could press the button, a shadow moved behind the glass. Tall, deliberate, familiar. My father was waiting. The warehouse door groaned as I pushed it open. The metallic echo swallowed my footsteps, reverberating through the vast empty space. Inside, the air was cold and smelled faintly of fuel and dust, like time itself had stopped breathing here. My father stood near the center beneath a hanging bulb that flickered with erratic light. He looked smaller than I remembered, yet more dangerous. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, and in his right hand, he held a small silver flask, the same one he used to carry when I was a kid. "Natalie," he said, his voice calm, almost paternal. "I knew you'd come." I didn't move closer. How did you find me? He smirked. You think I don't know how my own daughter thinks? You're sentimental. You always come back to where things started. The sound of rain began tapping against the roof, slow at first, then steady. I could hear the creak of the metal beams with every gust of wind. You shouldn't have done this, he said. You could have come to me directly. We could have handled it quietly. Now you've destroyed everything our family built. Our family? I shot back. You mean what you stole from your own parents? What you've been laundering through shell companies while preaching legacy. His eyes hardened. You sound just like them. I'll take that as a compliment. He took a step forward, and instinctively I backed away. You think you understand, but you don't, he said. You saw a few files, a few transactions, and thought you uncovered some grand conspiracy. You don't know what your grandparents were really involved in. What are you talking about? He hesitated just for a second, but I saw the flicker of calculation behind his eyes. They weren't saints, Natalie. They built their fortune by cutting corners, by exploiting loopholes. You think the business grew that fast because of hard work alone? No. They made deals with the kind of people I spent years cleaning up after. You're lying. I wish I were, he said quietly. I didn't steal their empire, I saved it. I made it legitimate. Everything I did to keep our name intact. The rain intensified, pounding the roof like gunfire. I felt the room tilt around me. Could it be true? My grandparents, the people who taught me everything about honesty and integrity, had hidden something darker? He took another step toward me, voice softening. It doesn't have to end badly. Give me the originals. Let me handle this. We can rewrite the story together, you and me. I almost believed the sincerity in his tone until I noticed his left hand, sliding slowly into his jacket pocket. Don't, I warned. He froze, then smiled faintly, always observant. From his pocket he pulled not a gun, but a small black drive, an exact twin of the one I had. He held it up between two fingers. You didn't think there was only one copy, did you? The light flickered again. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. My pulse quickened. You were never supposed to see any of this, he said. And now it's too late to turn back. Then the bulb above us burst, plunging the warehouse into darkness. The explosion of the light bulb left me blind for several seconds. The sharp scent of burnt filament stung my nose as glass rained softly onto the concrete floor. I froze listening. Every sound mattered now, the echo of footsteps, the faint rasp of breath, the rhythm of the rain outside. Natalie, my father's voice came, disembodied in the dark. You think you know everything, but you've only seen the version they wanted you to see. Show yourself, I said, trying to steady my voice. My phone's flashlight flickered to life, its narrow beam cutting through the blackness. The cone of light landed on an empty patch of floor. He had moved. Do you remember the night they died? He asked. Of course you do. You've been clinging to it like a wound that never heals. My grip tightened on the phone. What about it? It wasn't an accident. The words slammed into me. You're lying. No, Natalie. His voice came closer now, steady and deliberate. That drunk driver the police talked about, he was real. But he wasn't drunk. He was hired. My flashlight trembled in my hand. Hired by who? I crouched low and crawled toward it, splinters biting into my palms. Another shot rang out, this one closer. A piece of crate exploded beside my face, scattering wood chips. I bit back a scream and lunged forward, slamming my shoulder against the door until it burst open. Cold rain and wind hit me like a wall. Outside, the night was chaos, lightning flashing over the river, puddles reflecting the strobing sky. I sprinted toward the fence, my father's voice echoing behind me. Natalie, stop! Don't make this worse! But I didn't stop. I climbed the chain-link fence, scraping my hands raw, and threw myself over the other side. My knees hit mud, but I kept running, past the storage yard, past the broken lampposts, until the warehouse was nothing but a dark shape behind me. I found shelter under a bridge half a mile away. My body shook uncontrollably, not just from the cold, but from what I'd heard. My grandparents' deaths weren't an accident. They were silenced. And my father had known. When I finally dared to check my pockets, I realized I'd lost the original USB drive in the scramble. Panic surged until I remembered the copies I'd hidden. One at my apartment, one mailed to myself under a fake name, one sealed in a safety deposit box my grandparents had opened decades ago under E.H.M.N. Foster. I didn't even know about it until a few weeks ago, when the estate documents listed it among personal items of sentimental value. Maybe that wasn't just sentiment. Maybe it was a message. I looked out at the storm-churned river, heart steadying. They had planned for this, even from the grave. They hadn't just left me their fortune. They'd left me a map. I wiped the rain from my face, stood up, and whispered to the night, "You taught me well, Grandpa. Time to finish what you started." The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the city wrapped in that strange, heavy stillness that follows chaos. My clothes were soaked, my hair plastered to my face, but my mind had never been clearer. I walked for miles until I reached the small bus terminal on the edge of town and paid cash for a ticket heading east. No luggage, no ID, just a purpose that finally outweighed my fear. By midday, I arrived in the quiet, coastal city where my grandparents had once owned a modest vacation cottage. The bank listed in their will was still there, an old brick building with iron gates and stained glass windows. Inside, I requested access to the safety deposit box registered under E.H. and Foster. The clerk hesitated until I showed her the executor's authorization letter Matthew had given me weeks earlier. She led me to a small private room and handed me a narrow metal box. My hands trembled as I unlocked it. Inside wasn't money or jewelry, but a slim black notebook, wrapped in an old handkerchief embroidered with my grandmother's initials. Beneath it was a key, ornate, heavy, the kind used for old locks. I opened the notebook carefully. The first page bore my grandfather's handwriting. For Natalie. If you're reading this, we're gone, and Richard's choices have caught up with him. You are our redemption, but not through wealth, through truth. Each page that followed was meticulous, written over years. It wasn't a diary, it was a record. Dates, names, transactions, partnerships, and coded references to people who had funded, bribed, and manipulated their logistics company decades ago. But what caught my eye wasn't the corruption, it was how they'd quietly dismantled it over time, transferring assets into legitimate ventures, covering the trail to protect the employees who had no idea what they'd been part of. At the end of the notebook was a single line, underlined twice. The key unlocks what money never could, our real legacy. Look under the roots of what you grew with your own hands. It hit me immediately. The garden, the one behind their house where Grandpa taught me to grow tomatoes and Grandma planted wildflowers. I hadn't been there since the funeral, but if they'd hidden something, that was where it would be. I took the next train back. My heart pounded the whole way. By the time I reached the property, the evening sun was low, painting everything gold. The garden was overgrown now, the soil hard and dry. But the old oak tree still stood tall at the center, the same one where Grandpa had carved my initials years ago. I knelt beneath it, brushed aside the dirt, and found a small metal hatch embedded in the ground, almost invisible. The ornate key slid in perfectly. My breath caught as I turned it. With a soft click, the hatch opened to reveal a weatherproof chest. Inside was another notebook, thicker than the first, and a sealed envelope with my name on it. I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. My grandmother's handwriting read, "Natalie, the truth doesn't destroy bloodlines. It purifies them. Whatever you find here, share it. Not with lawyers, not with family, with the world." I looked at the notebooks, the chest, the garden that had once been my childhood sanctuary, and I finally understood. This wasn't just an inheritance. It was a mission. The real fortune my grandparents had left me wasn't $26 million. It was the truth powerful enough to end the corruption they'd helped build, and the courage to do it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered, "I'll finish what you started." And for the first time since they died, I didn't feel alone. It took me 2 days to go through every page of the notebooks. I barely slept, fueled by coffee, grief, and a quiet, cold fury that built with each revelation. My grandparents hadn't just chronicled corruption, they'd documented the entire architecture of deceit that had sustained the Harrington family for half a century. Offshore accounts, falsified charity donations, hidden subsidiaries funneling funds through shell companies registered under fake names, and every single signature, every authorizing approval, traced back to one man. My father. The deeper I read, the clearer it became. My grandparents had been planning to come clean. They'd spent years setting things right from within, dismantling what they could, but before they could expose it all, they were silenced. Their car crash had been no accident. There were coded entries, notes about pressure from unnamed partners, mentions of Richard's panic, and one final entry written just days before their deaths. If anything happens, it won't be fate. It will be family. By the time I closed the last notebook, my hands were shaking, not from fear but from resolve. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to run anymore. I wasn't going to hide behind sentiment or family loyalty. If my father had destroyed our name, I would rebuild it, but through truth, not illusion. The next morning, I drove into the city, straight to the headquarters of Harrington Logistics. Security recognized me immediately, and despite their hesitation, I demanded to see my father. They couldn't refuse. I was still by law part of the board, thanks to the shares. Grandpa had secretly transferred to me years ago, under my mother's maiden name. When I entered the top-floor conference room, my father was already there, standing by the window overlooking the skyline. His reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered. Tired, frayed, cornered. "So," he said quietly, "you found it." "I found everything," I replied, laying the 2 notebooks on the table. "Every deal, every payment, every lie." He turned, eyes searching mine. "Do you have any idea what will happen if you release this? To me, to this family?" "Yes," I said. "And that's why I'm doing it." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he laughed bitterly. "You think the world cares about truth? They'll chew you up, Natalie. You're not a hero. You're just another headline." "Maybe," I said. "But headlines change the world faster than silence ever did." He stepped closer, voice lowering to a threat. "Don't do this. You'll regret it." I met his gaze steadily. "I already regret being your daughter." That broke something in him. His mask of control cracked for the first time. He reached for the notebooks, but I pulled them back. "These don't belong to you anymore," I said. "They belong to history." As I turned to leave, he called out one last time, "If you do this, there's no coming back." I paused at the door. "I'm not coming back," I said. "I'm moving forward." Outside, I slipped into the elevator, exhaled deeply, and pressed G. I didn't feel fear anymore, only purpose. By the time I returned to my apartment, the city was humming like nothing had changed, oblivious to the storm about to hit the Harrington Empire. I spent the night drafting a detailed timeline of every illegal maneuver, cross-referencing it with bank statements, contracts, and emails from the notebooks. I knew I couldn't just release accusations without evidence. This had to be airtight. At dawn, I emailed a comprehensive dossier to a trusted investigative journalist I'd met through my grandparents' charitable network. Her response was almost immediate. "Natalie, this is explosive. You're talking decades of fraud, shell companies, bribery. You have proof. Are you ready for the fallout?" "I am," I typed back. "Do what needs to be done." By noon, the first articles hit the web. Headlines screamed about Harrington Logistics, hidden empire of deceit, fraudulent accounting practices, and family corruption. Exposed. Social media erupted. Analysts who had once praised my father's strategic genius were now dissecting his every move. And I watched quietly from my apartment, knowing that every step had been meticulously orchestrated. The calls started immediately. Lawyers, board members, distant relatives, all demanding explanations. My father tried to reach me, sending texts, emails, even messages through mutual acquaintances. I ignored them. Every time I checked my phone, I saw the growing avalanche of consequences. Stock prices plunged. Partners withdrew. Contracts were canceled. Employees whispered in hallways about possible arrests. The Harrington name, once synonymous with power and control, was crumbling. And my father? He became a ghost. First, he disappeared from his office. Then he stopped answering his own phone. The man who had once commanded rooms with a glance now hid behind security. His authority evaporated overnight. I imagined him pacing in that high-rise corner office, realizing too late that he had overplayed his hand. And I felt no satisfaction, only clarity. This was justice, not revenge. By the third day, regulatory agencies had launched formal investigations. The journalist's exposé had gone global. I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by papers, charts, and notes, watching as the consequences unfolded. No amount of pleading or family theatrics could undo what had been revealed. Every lie, every unethical maneuver, every attempt to manipulate or control, now existed in the public record. Yet amidst the chaos I found peace. My grandparents' vision, their insistence on integrity and character over profit, had been vindicated. I wasn't just honoring their memory, I was living it. I began to plan the next steps, setting up foundations in their names, ensuring employees previously taken advantage of were protected, and gradually assuming control of the legitimate parts of the company. that had been tainted by greed. For the first time in years, I felt free. The weight of hidden truths, family expectations, and unspoken resentments lifted. I wasn't a pawn, a victim, or a bystander. I was Natalie Alexander, granddaughter, heir, and guardian of a legacy that valued people over profit. And the Harrington Empire? It was falling, piece by piece, under the weight of its own deceit. The morning after the exposé went viral, I woke to a silence that felt almost sacred. My apartment, modest as it was, suddenly seemed like a sanctuary amid the chaos I had unleashed on the Harrington Empire. For the first time, I could breathe without the invisible weight of my family's manipulation pressing down on me. The world had shifted overnight, and I realized that freedom didn't just come from money. It came from truth. I spent hours in front of my laptop, crafting letters, emails, and announcements. My first priority was the employees, many of whom had been unknowingly dragged into illegal schemes. I contacted dozens personally, apologizing on behalf of the company while promising to protect their jobs, benefits, and pensions. Some responded with cautious gratitude, others with skepticism, but a few sent heartfelt messages that reminded me why I had fought so hard to preserve integrity. The next step was consolidating the legitimate parts of Harrington logistics. While my father had tangled the company in illegal contracts and shell operations, there remained profitable divisions operating ethically under tight margins. I reached out to financial advisors, lawyers, and longtime company managers who had never compromised their values. Together, we began to restructure the company from the ground up. Policies were rewritten, compliance procedures reinforced, and a new, transparent accounting system implemented. Throughout it all, I kept a low profile. Interviews were rare, press releases carefully worded, and personal appearances avoided. I wanted the focus to be on accountability and integrity, not on me as the heiress who had exposed her own family. Slowly, I began to see changes. Partners reached out to rebuild trust. Clients returned, and employees who had feared for their future felt reassured. In the evenings, I would sit quietly, reflecting on my grandparents' teachings. Elizabeth's voice in my head reminded me that wealth was a tool, not a goal, while Harold's practical wisdom guided me through decision after decision. I realized that their most valuable legacy wasn't money. It was the standard they set for character, loyalty, and fairness. That standard would now define me too. Then came the inevitable backlash. My father tried a few last-minute legal maneuvers, sending letters filled with threats and accusations. Jason attempted to launch his cryptocurrency project using my name to intimidate me into concessions. Their library, once a quiet sanctuary, became a resource center where young entrepreneurs and scholars could learn, network, and be inspired. Every corner of the property carried reminders of their lives. Harold's chessboard, Elizabeth's meticulously labeled recipe books, photographs of family and friends who had supported them through decades of hard work. I felt their presence in every detail, guiding my decisions even in their absence. Unexpectedly, my parents and siblings continued to hover in the background, but their influence diminished. My father attempted passive-aggressive strategies, hoping to sway me, but my legal safeguards and clear boundaries prevented any intrusion. Jason's ventures collapsed silently, and he learned the hard lesson that entitlement does not replace effort. Aunt Pam and Uncle Steve eventually faded from my daily concerns, their demands and criticisms, powerless against the legal and moral clarity that now defined my role. For the first time, family interactions became transactional in a healthy sense. They existed if they added value, but they could no longer dictate my choices. Meanwhile, I discovered a profound sense of personal freedom. I returned to teaching not because I needed a paycheck, but because I wanted to remain connected to the joy of shaping young minds. Volunteering, mentoring, and even occasional classroom. Teaching reminded me of why my grandparents had always celebrated character over wealth. I also explored new passions, travel, philanthropy, and investments in socially responsible businesses. My days were busy but fulfilling, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt aligned with purpose rather than obligation. The most remarkable change, however, was internal. Where grief had once weighed heavily, I found resilience. Where fear of betrayal had lingered, I found clarity. Where confusion about worth had existed, I found confidence. The estate, while enormous, was no longer a burden. It was a tool to honor my grandparents' values and amplify the impact of their life's work. The wealth itself was secondary to the responsibility, the lessons, and the opportunity to create meaningful change. At night, I often sat in the grand but now welcoming living room, imagining conversations with my grandparents, feeling their approval and encouragement. I had honored their memory not by yielding to greed or familial pressure, but by safeguarding their vision and extending it to the world. What had once felt like a curse, a sudden inheritance, thrust upon me, had transformed into the greatest privilege I could imagine. I realized that true wealth was never just money. It was legacy, trust, purpose, and the courage to stand firm in the face of manipulation. In claiming that inheritance, I had not only secured my own future, but had also honored the principles that had shaped me into the person my grandparents had always believed I could become.